Hello, my name is Mylant. I am an Umpqua signature tyer, as well as a fly fishing guide out of Anglers Covey in Colorado Springs. And I was fortunate enough to be invited up to Anglers All studio to do a tying demo for you guys today. So I'm going to walk you through the tying process to tie my Scud Bomb. Now this is a scud pattern I developed specifically for Euro nymphing. It's heavy. It's going to provide all the weight you need to get down in the different sizes and bead sizes that I use on it. And it's meant to act as a point fly on a Euro nymphing type rig or a tight line rig. So with the way I post the bead on this fly, it's going to make it roll so it's always riding hook point up. It has a significantly less chance of hooking the bottom of the river. At this point, I have, with guiding, fished this fly more on a traditional indicator rig than I have Euro nymphing, and it has done absolutely exceptional on those traditional indicator style rigs. So the whole point behind developing this fly is I wanted something that was a true profile of a scud that gave me enough weight to not have to use any form of weight. So this fly acts as my primary source of weight in my rig, regardless of if I'm rigging in a Euro nymphing style or if I'm rigging a traditional indicator rig. Euro style, I put this on point. On a traditional indicator rig, if I'm doing the tractor trailer style, I put this as my first fly and trail a couple flies behind it. This past year, April, May, and very beginning of June, this fly, without question, outproduced any other fly I had throughout the South Platte drainage. We're talking like 5-to-1 when it comes to numbers on this fly. So it has been an absolute killer for me. I love that you don't have to use any other form of weight. You can just change the size of this fly. So I hope these tying instructions are clear and you guys can tie a few up. Let's get into it. Okay, so for a hook, we're going to use the TMC 2487 in a size 14. And then on that, we're going to put a Umpqua jig bomb. I'm going to use orange for this because I'm doing the orange colorway. And that's going to be a 3mm bead for the size 14. And for thread, we're going to use UTC 70 denier in burnt orange. So first thing we're going to do here is we want that bead back towards the bend of the hook, and we're going to build a thread base right in the middle of this hook shank here, okay? So we want to go basically slightly behind the point and slightly in front of the point, and then remove the tag. Now what we're looking for here is I'm going to slide this bead forward, and I want it to stay standing on the top of the hook shank. So I know I don't have enough thread wraps on, but I'm going to slide the bead forward, and you're going to see how it's going to want to roll to the bottom of the hook shank, just like that. So that means we don't have enough thread wraps on there, so we're going to add a little bit more just to thicken up this base a little bit here, okay? So I went down and forward one more time. We'll slide that bead up, still rolls. We're going to do one more layer of this thread base here and end with your thread on the front side. So now let's test. I push that bead up. See, I was wanting to stay on top of the hook shank there. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so we're going to roll that bead back down the hook shank off those thread wraps, and we're going to tag that thread with some super glue. I like to use Zap-A-Gap here because it's thin and it's easy to apply with that brush on applicator. Okay, now we'll move that bead back forward. Sometimes you have to rock it back and forth, and we want the bead sitting directly above the hook point. Okay, just like that. Now we're going to do, so I call this technique posting the bead. We're going to start doing X wraps on the underside of the bead. So I'm going to pull the thread from thread being in front of the bead. I'm going to pull the thread towards myself, behind the bead, up and over the hook shank, and we're going to do that on the other side. I'm going to do this about 15 times or so. Now what you're going to notice here when I rotate this hook for you to see is most of these thread wraps are ending up on my side of that bead. So you'll see this side of the bead looks kind of bare. As I rotate, you can see those thread wraps there. If you look from underneath, notice they're just on this side. So what we have to do to get those thread wraps on the other side of the bead now is we're going to reverse direction. So that is easy enough. All you have to do is pull that thread up, come halfway around the bead, and then start those X wraps in the opposite direction. This is going to put thread wraps on the other side of that bead. And we're going to do about 15 here as well. Now if I rotate, you can see we have much better coverage on the underside of that bead with the thread. And so finally we're going to take a few parachute post style wraps around this bead. Okay, and then we'll end with our thread behind it. Now we're going to tag all of that thread with some super glue as well. And that's going to prevent this bead from rolling around the hook shank. Just tag that side and that side. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to walk our thread down the hook shank, and the way you want to gauge how far down the hook shank to go is we're going to go down and then I'm going to pull my thread towards the bottom of the hook eye, and when my thread is sitting level, that means I've gone far enough down the hook shank. Okay, and that's going to be my gauge for how far my material is going to go. So I come down here, bring my thread towards the hook eye. You can see how that's pretty level. So that's my gauge. I'm never going to pass that far down the hook bend with my thread. And then we'll come back forward. Then we're going to come in front of the bead, lay down a little thread base. Now it's important you want to leave about an eye length of bare hook shank behind the eye. We have a lot of stuff to tie off right behind this hook eye, so you absolutely want to prevent crowding the hook eye here, okay? And then we'll just build up a little bit of a cone or carrot type shape of the thread, being thinnest furthest from the bead and thickest closest to the bead. Now for a ribbing, we're going to use some 5X tippet. Okay, so I'm going to grab a section of this 5X tippet, capture it right on top of the hook shank here, and as I secure it, I'm going to pull it away from myself to secure it along the far side of the hook shank. And I'm going to secure this all the way down to that index point where I stopped my thread, and then work myself back up to behind the bead here. Now we're going to add our scud back. So we use 1/8 inch clear scud back from the hairline for this. And what we're going to do with this stuff is we need to cut a point into the end of it here, okay? So I'm going to try to capture this as best as I can, but I'm going to snip off a corner, flip it around, snip off the other corner. You can see that's going to give us a little point, okay? We're going to grab that point with the thread directly behind the bead. We're going to need to take a few nice tight wraps so it doesn't pull out, because we're going to stretch this pretty hard as we secure it down the hook shank. And so I've got some good nice tight wraps on that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be stretching and pushing down, and that scud back is going to fold around the hook shank as I do that. I'm just going to secure it all the way down to that index point. Right there. And then work back up. Okay, now it's time to start the dubbing process. Now this is the most tedious part of this fly, is doing this dubbing, because it takes a lot of dubbing to get the shape that we're looking for here. So for dubbing, I use a custom blend. I'm going to use, it's this, because we're doing a dead scud, we're using the orange. The blend here is 50% mixture of hairline, orange rabbit dubbing, and hairline natural hare's ear. So we're going to grab some of this dubbing, and the first thing we're going to do is work on getting this bead covered here. Now I like to use these little envelope wetters to moisten my fingertips. It makes it a lot easier to get the dubbing spinning on the hook shank here. So the important part about this first section is doing a really thin dubbing noodle. As you can see here, that's as thick as I want it to go. Okay, so I'm just going to be using very sparse amounts of dubbing, like that much, and just building up this dubbing noodle here. Okay, now the first couple wraps we take with this dubbing noodle, we're going to be going around the bead like we were doing with those parachute post style wraps, okay? I'm going to do one wrap just to get that dubbing started, and then I'm going to take some wraps just around the bead here, working under each wrap, trying to get good coverage of that bead. Okay, now once I'm about out of dubbing, I've got to add more. And then we're going to start doing the X style wraps under the bead to get the underside of this bead covered. Okay, so now we're doing the X wraps. Coming under and in front, under and in front. We're gonna do this until I can look underneath and see that I've got full coverage of that bead. So I'll turn the hook shank so I can see, and then guide the dubbing noodle onto the bare parts underneath the bead. So you can see here how I have some bare sections of thread under there. I'm going to be using the dubbing noodle to make sure I'm getting all of that covered. See that? Cover that spot. Excuse me while I gotta rotate this so I can see what I'm doing here. Okay, and then we can end behind the bead. So you can see here as I rotate that hook shank, we've got that whole underside of the bead covered there. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start working on the rear taper. Again, using a pretty thin dubbing noodle, because we do not want a whole bunch of dubbing at the rear of this fly or at the front. That's what's gonna help give us that real scud shape. Okay, so I'm going real thin on my dubbing noodle again. We're gonna just get that dubbing noodle to be 2 to 3 inches long. If you go with much more than that, it's hard to be precise with where you're placing these wraps. Okay, so we'll work down towards our index point here, making sure we have all of that thread covered. And then from there, we're gonna start working back up towards the bead. And when we get up to the bead, we are really gonna pack dubbing in there because we're gonna end up brushing this thing out. So it's gonna be a little thinner than what you see prior to the brushing process. So we're gonna grab more of that dubbing. Nice thin noodle. And once you're happy with that rear taper, you can thicken this dubbing noodle a little bit to really pack that dubbing behind the bead. This is the most tedious part of this fly, is just the constantly having to add dubbing. Okay, and then I'm gonna thicken up this noodle a little bit here. We're gonna pack this dubbing in. So we wanna get real tight on that bead. We're just about there for the rear. There we go. That looks real good. And then we're gonna jump to the front side of that bead, ensuring we got good coverage here. That looks good. I'm gonna take one wrap off, thin up the dubbing noodle, and do a couple little X wraps as I work to the front side of that bead. Okay, so we'll boom, X, come to the front side. Now I'm gonna work towards the hook eye. Again, ensuring I'm leaving about an eye length or maybe just a half eye length of bare hook shank behind that bead so I have enough room to tie everything off. And then we're gonna build the taper on the front side up towards the bead. So working my way back to the bead. Got to get a little more dubbing here. And again, we're going to pack this dubbing in real tight close to that bead. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, and then we want to do a really thin dubbing noodle to get back up to behind the hook eye. I'm going to add a thin dubbing noodle, do a couple X wraps again, and then work towards that hook eye. And I want to end with bare thread right behind the hook eye. We'll come behind, do this X wrap, final little taper in the front, and you can see I have this small amount of dubbing left on here. I'm going to work up to the hook eye, and then end with bare thread right behind the hook eye. Okay, now at this point I'm going to do a little half hitch to prevent my thread from falling off of the hook shank, because with that downward facing eye, if I was just to leave my bobbin here dangling, that thread will fall off and you'll lose some of that work that you did. Okay, so I'm going to stroke some of these hare's ear fibers downward, and then we're going to stretch the scud back over top. Now when we do this, if you pull really hard, it's going to have a tendency to want to fall off to the side like that. So we don't want to really stretch too hard, just a little bit of a stretch. And I'm going to hold this in front of the hook eye with my dominant hand, my bobbin hand. And then I'm going to use my material hand, which is my left hand, to come up and over and do a really loose wrap. You can see how loose that thread is there. And push down and secure. Okay, so I've got the scud back secured. It's right where I want it. I'm going to do a few wraps walking towards the bead with my thread. Okay, and then I'm going to step back towards that hook eye with a wrap, pull the scud back out of the way, and do another half hitch here. Again, to keep that thread from falling off the hook shank. Now, the very last thing we do prior to brushing is snip off the scud back. So if you snip this off now, you are probably going to lose it under those thread wraps. So next step is we're going to take the 5X tippet and we're going to start doing the ribbing on this thing. Now what we're going to do is 3 wraps of the 5X in the back, 2 wraps on the front side of the bead. Okay, so I'm going to try to turn this towards you so you guys can see. If I just take this and start wrapping, it's going to have a tendency to push that scud back around the hook shank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the scud back in place with the fingernail and then take my wrap. Okay, so there's one. Get really tight with it, make sure everything's still centered. Hold down about the middle section. The last wrap is going to touch the bead, so this one I'm going to about split my index point at the end of the hook shank and the section of the bead. Not quite far enough. Jump up a little bit further here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and then underneath, this last one for the back side is going to come up and it's going to touch the bead with that wrap. Okay, and then we're going to go under and then to the front side of the bead, and this first wrap on the front side of the bead is going to touch the bead again. The next one is going to go right in the middle of wherever the bead is and the hook eye is, making sure I'm not spinning that scud back. Okay, and then the final one, I'm going to not do a wrap, but I'm just going to pull the thread upwards right behind that hook eye, and then with my thread come up and over to secure that tippet. Now I have that tippet secured right at the hook eye. What I'm going to do is work my thread backwards on this little thread dam I have here with 2 or 3 wraps. Okay, and once I'm at the back of that thread dam, I'm going to take the tippet and fold it back. This puts a crease in it, and then I'm going to grab that with my thread and I'm going to work that thread forward now to the hook eye. And so with that bend in that tippet, it's not going to pull out now. Okay, so we'll stretch the scud back rearwards to get it out of the way. Then we're going to sneak in a whip finish or 2 right in front of all this stuff behind the hook eye. Okay, so we're going to do 1 whip finish, tighten, come in with your fingernails, pinch right where you did that whip finish, and it'll suck that thread underneath that scud back. And then we'll do another one of those. And what we've done here is we've basically pinched that scud back between the thread dam and the thread dam we just created by doing these whip finishes, so that should never pull out. And we've got a very clear hook eye, so it'll be super easy to thread your tippet. We can go ahead and snip off our thread. We're not going to snip anything else yet. First we're going to do some super glue prior to snipping off the scud back and the tippet. So I'm just going to take a bodkin I have and put some zap on the end of the bodkin. That'll allow me to be very precise with where this glue goes. So I'm just going to tag these thread wraps here. Both sides, top and underneath. And then moisture helps super glue dry, so if you give it a little breathe, it'll speed up that drying process. Not tacky anymore, so it's nice and dry. Now we're gonna go ahead and trim off the tippet. So I'm gonna get that tippet snipped nice and close. And then we're gonna trim the scud back. Now, if you take this scud back, just lift and snip, you're gonna have a little nub there, which I guarantee you the fish don't care about, but I do when I'm looking at flies in my box. So I'm gonna do the cutting process in in 3 snips. So I'm gonna stretch the scud back, just nick the corner of it, rotate, nick the corner of it again, rotate, and give it one more nick. And that'll ensure you have no nub. The front of the hook is super clean, nothing impeding the eye, so it's really easy to get your tippet through there. Now the final step, you can see we got this beautiful scud shape to this thing. Final step is going to be brushing it out, so I'm just going to use one of these little Velcro brushes I have from Stonefo. We're just going to stroke downwards. Try to free some of that stuff up. You can hit that other side, go back and forth and then stroke down. We're just trying to loosen up some of that dubbing to create some legs here. Back and forth and then stroke it all down. Same on this side. And right now is the time you're going to find out if you secured that tippet really good behind the hook guy, because if you haven't, the Velcro will pull it out. Okay, that's what we're looking for, and then we're going to stroke all of that down. The final step is going to be snipping right under the hook point, and then draw a line from the hook eye to the hook point, and snip any really long ones there. And that is the Scud Bomb.